General Kethver stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue planet turn slowly in the darkness of space. His forearms crossed behind his back as he studied the reports on his datapad. For 300 years he had served the Zephyrian Empire. He had conquered 47 worlds and defeated 63 different alien species. None of them had ever surprised him. The humans were supposed to be different. That's what his commanders had told him when they sent him to this small corner of the galaxy. Intelligence reports said these creatures were new to space travel. They had only left their homeworld 50 years ago. Their ships used primitive fuel rockets. Their weapons shot simple metal bullets. They should have been easy to defeat. Kethver looked at his reflection in the bridge window. His purple skin showed the scars of many battles. His large black eyes had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. He was considered one of the finest military minds in the Empire. Taking control of human space should have been a simple task. The first contact happened 3 days ago. Captain Jake Morrison commanded a human patrol ship called the HFY Defiance. The ship was small and old, with dents and repairs visible on its metal hull. It carried only 40 crew members. Kethver's scout ships could have destroyed it in seconds. Following standard protocol, Kethver ordered his ships to surround the human vessel. He opened communication channels and demanded their surrender. This was how first contact always worked. The new species would see the power of the Zephyrian fleet and submit peacefully. It saved time and lives. Jake Morrison appeared on the screen. He was a tall man with short brown hair and green eyes. His uniform was worn but clean. He looked directly at Kethver without fear. This was the first surprise. Most species showed some sign of terror when they saw a Zephyrian general for the first time. "This is Captain Morrison of the United Human Space Navy," the man said. His voice was calm and steady. "You are in human territory. State your business or leave." Kethver felt his secondary heart skip a beat. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. He leaned forward in his command chair and activated the translation system. "I am General Kethver of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet," he replied. "You will surrender your vessel immediately and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in your destruction." Jake Morrison smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a predator makes before it attacks. "General, I've got news for you. Humans don't surrender." Before Kethver could respond, the human ship opened fire. The weapons were primitive projectile cannons that fired metal shells. They should not have been able to damage Zephyrian shields. But somehow, the human gunners had calculated the exact frequency needed to disrupt the shield generators. The first volley punched through the defenses of 2 scout ships. "Impossible," whispered Commander Yethros, Kethver, second in command. "Their technology level is too low for that kind of precision." The battle that followed broke every rule of space warfare that Kethver knew. The human ship was outnumbered 10-1. It was outgunned by weapons that were centuries more advanced. Any rational commander would have attempted to escape or asked for terms. Jake Morrison did neither. Instead, the Defiance charged straight at the largest Zephyrian cruiser. Its engines burned at maximum power as it weaved between enemy fire. The human ship took hit after hit, but it kept coming. Pieces of metal flew off its hull as explosions tore through its armor. Lieutenant Lisa Carter, the human weapons officer, continued firing even as her console exploded in sparks around her. Engineer Ben Rodriguez kept the engines running while fire spread through the engine room. The ship's doctor, Helen Brooks, dragged wounded crew members to safety while the artificial gravity failed and sent them floating through the corridors. "They're going to ram us," said Commander Yethros, his voice full of disbelief. "All ships, evasive action," Kethver ordered. But he couldn't take his eyes off the human vessel. Half of it was on fire now. The bridge windows were cracked. Atmosphere was venting from dozens of holes in the hull. But still, it came forward. At the last second, Jake Morrison changed course. Instead of hitting the cruiser directly, the Defiance scraped along its side. The human ship's remaining weapons fired at point-blank range into the Zephyrian hull. The explosion tore both ships apart. Jake Morrison's final transmission came through the static and flames. This is Captain Morrison to all human vessels. We are the Defiance, we do not yield, we do not break. Remember that. The communication ended in an explosion of light as the human ship's reactor went critical. The blast wave damaged 3 more Zephyrian vessels and forced the entire fleet to retreat. Kethver stared at the debris field where the human ship had been. In all his years of military service, he had never seen anything like it. The humans had turned their own destruction into a weapon. They had chosen to die rather than surrender, and they had made their death cost the enemy dearly. "Sir," said Commander Yethros quietly, "what are your orders?" Kethver didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about Jake Morrison's smile and the way the human crew had fought to the very end. They had shown no fear, no hesitation, no desire to preserve their own lives if it meant abandoning their duty. "Send a message to Fleet Command," Kethver finally said. "Tell them we have encountered the human species. Tell them this will not be as simple as we thought." Over the next few days, more reports came in from other first contact encounters. Every human ship behaved the same way. They fought when they should have fled. They attacked when they should have surrendered. They turned every battle into a lesson in how to die with honor. Lieutenant Commander Sam Parker had rammed his scout ship into a Zephyrian supply depot, destroying enough equipment to supply a small army. Commander Rachel Webb had used her ships, mining lasers to cut through the hull of a battlecruiser before the humans were overwhelmed. Captain Tony Davis had ejected his ship's cargo pods like missiles, each one filled with explosives and guided by a volunteer crew member, who stayed behind to make sure it hit the target. The humans were not the most advanced species Kethver had encountered. They were not the strongest or the fastest, but they had something he had never seen before. They had a complete refusal to accept defeat. They treated death in battle not as a failure, but as a final opportunity to hurt their enemies. Kethver studied the tactical reports late into the night cycle. His military advisors were already planning the full invasion. They had calculated that it would take 6 months to conquer all human worlds. The humans had only a few hundred ships scattered across a dozen star systems. The Zephyrian Empire had thousands of vessels and millions of soldiers, but Kethver found himself wondering if the numbers told the whole story. The humans had lost every battle so far, but somehow each loss felt like a victory for them. They were learning from each encounter, adapting their tactics, and spreading word of how to hurt Zephyrian ships. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be getting stronger with each defeat. Other species became demoralized when they lost battles. The humans became more determined. It was as if losing only made them angrier and more creative. As Kethver prepared for sleep, he looked once more at the image of Captain Jake Morrison. The human had been dead for 3 days, but his final words kept echoing in the general's mind. "We do not yield. We do not break." For the first time in his long military career, General Kethver wondered if he was about to face an enemy that could not be defeated by conventional means. The humans might lose every battle, but Kethver was beginning to suspect that they would never truly lose the war. He was about to learn just how right he was. 3 months passed after the first encounter with Captain Jake Morrison. The Zephyrian High Command had studied all the reports from the border skirmishes. They reached the same conclusion they always did when facing a new species. War was inevitable. General Kethver received his orders on a cold morning in space. He was to command the 5th Fleet in a full invasion of human territory. 200 ships, 50,000 soldiers, and enough firepower to level continents. The war planners estimated it would take 6 weeks to force human surrender. Kethver had his doubts, but he followed orders. He had been a soldier for too long to question the wisdom of his superiors. The fleet moved toward human space like a dark cloud blocking out the stars. The first target was New Geneva, a human colony world with 2 million inhabitants. It was a farming planet, growing food for other human settlements. Intelligence reports said it had minimal military defenses. 1 orbital platform, a few dozen patrol ships, and a small ground force of maybe 5,000 soldiers. Colonel Amy Thompson commanded the planet's defense. She was a short woman with red hair and blue eyes, wearing a uniform that looked like it had seen many battles. When Kethver's fleet arrived in orbit, she was the one who answered his demands for surrender. "Colonel Thompson," Kethver said through the communication link, "you are facing overwhelming force. Your planet cannot be defended. I offer you one chance to surrender with honor." Amy Thompson looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled the same way Jake Morrison had smiled 3 months ago. "General, I think you still don't understand humans very well. We don't have a word for surrender in our military dictionary." "Then you will all die for nothing," Kethver replied. "Maybe," Amy Thompson said, "but we'll make sure it costs you plenty." The orbital battle lasted 6 hours. The human defense platform was destroyed in the first 30 minutes, along with most of their patrol ships. But the humans had done something strange with their remaining vessels. Instead of fighting in formation like proper military units, each ship acted independently. Captain Larry Stone commanded a cargo hauler that had been fitted with missile launchers. He used his ship's industrial tractor beam to grab chunks of asteroid debris and throw them at Zephyrian cruisers. Commander Janet Mills turned her passenger liner into a giant bomb, loading it with explosives and ramming it into a battleship. Captain Rick Davis used his mining ship's drilling lasers to bore holes in enemy hulls, staying so close that the Zephyrians couldn't shoot back without hitting their own vessels. But the real surprise came when Kethver's forces landed on the planet's surface. He expected to face the 5,000 human soldiers in organized formations. Instead, he encountered something that had no name in Zephyrian military manuals. Every human on the planet was fighting. Old men with farming tools attacked Zephyrian tanks. Teenage girls used hunting rifles to snipe at soldiers from rooftops. Children threw rocks and homemade explosives from windows. Women driving school buses rammed them into enemy vehicles. Even the planet's doctors and teachers had taken up weapons. Kyle Adams was 17 years old and worked at his family's farm. When Zephyrian soldiers approached his home, he used the farm's crop-dusting aircraft to drop containers of chemical fertilizer on them. The explosion took out an entire squad and damaged 2 armored vehicles. Mary Sullivan was 73 years old and ran a small grocery store in the main town. She had filled her store with homemade bombs and waited for enemy soldiers to enter. The blast destroyed half a city block and killed 20 Zephyrians. Mary Sullivan died in the explosion, but she took her enemies with her. Commander Pete Jackson coordinated the space defense from a hidden command center. Even after losing most of his ships, he kept fighting with whatever he could find. Civilian shuttles became suicide bombers. Cargo pods were filled with explosives and launched like missiles. Even the planet's communication satellites were turned into weapons by ramming them into Zephyrian vessels. What disturbed Kethver most was how creative the humans were in their methods of war. Sergeant Nina Brooks and her squad had retreated into abandoned mining tunnels beneath the capital city. But instead of hiding, they had flooded the tunnels with water and used the planet's natural hot springs to create steam explosions that collapsed entire sections of the city onto advancing Zephyrian forces. Private Danny Shaw had climbed onto the back of a Zephyrian mech suit during street fighting. While enemy fire tore through his body, he managed to pull out critical control cables and short-circuit the machine's power systems. The mech crashed into a building, killing Danny, but also destroying the Zephyrian command post inside. Dr. Lisa Grant had turned the planet's main hospital into a fortress. She treated wounded civilians and soldiers while also manufacturing explosives in the basement using medical supplies. When Zephyrian forces finally broke through her defenses, they found that she had booby-trapped the entire building. The explosion destroyed 2 city blocks and eliminated an entire Zephyrian battalion. The battle for New Geneva lasted 3 weeks instead of 3 days. When it finally ended, the planet was in ruins. Every major city had been destroyed. The farms were burning wastelands. The orbital facilities were debris fields floating in space, but the cost to the Zephyrian forces was unprecedented. Kethver had lost 30 ships and 8,000 soldiers, taking a farming world that should have fallen in hours. Worse, the humans had broadcast everything across their communication networks. Every human world now knew exactly how to fight. Zephyrian forces and how to make each battle as expensive as possible. Similar battles were happening across human space. On the industrial world of New Detroit, factory workers had converted their production lines to build weapons and explosives. Manager Tom Wilson led teams that turned mining equipment into siege weapons. Engineer Sarah Davis used industrial robots to build automated defense systems in the city sewers. On the research station at Alpha Centauri, scientists had weaponized their own experiments. Dr. Alan Parker released experimental viruses that ate through Zephyrian equipment. Professor Linda Rogers used particle accelerators as massive guns that could punch holes through battleship armor. Each human world that fell taught the others new ways to resist. They shared information about Zephyrian weaknesses, successful tactics, and effective weapons. The humans were losing every battle, but they were learning from each defeat and passing that knowledge to other worlds. Kethver found himself studying battle reports that made no sense according to traditional military thinking. The humans had no central command structure that could be destroyed. They had no critical resources that could be captured to force surrender. Every civilian was a potential soldier. Every piece of technology was a potential weapon, most alien. Species fought to preserve their lives and their civilization. They would surrender when the cost became too high. The humans seemed to fight as if preservation was not the goal. They fought as if making the enemy pay the highest possible price was more important than surviving. After 6 months of warfare, Kethver's Fifth Fleet had conquered 12 human worlds, but his force was reduced to less than half its original strength. The war that was supposed to last 6 weeks had become a grinding campaign of attrition that showed no signs of ending. Kethver sat in his command chair, looking at casualty reports that kept growing longer. He had achieved every military objective assigned to him, but somehow it felt like losing. The humans were teaching him that winning battles meant nothing if you could not break the enemy's will to fight, and human will seem to be unbreakable. Standing on his bridge, watching another human world burn in the distance, Kethver realized that he was no longer fighting a conventional war. He was fighting something new and terrible. He was fighting an entire species that had decided death was preferable. To defeat, for the first time in his military career, General Kethver began to wonder if this was a war that could actually be won. The war had been going on for 2 years when General Kethver received orders to attack Kepler Station. This was not just another human colony world. Kepler Station was humanity's most important research facility, floating in orbit around a dead star. It contained their most advanced laboratories, their biggest computer systems, and their brightest scientists. Intelligence reports said the station held the secrets to human technology development. If Kethver could capture it intact, the Zephyrian Empire would finally understand how humans had adapted so quickly to alien warfare. The station was defended by only 12 human ships and maybe 3,000 people. It should have been an easy victory. Admiral Susan Clark commanded the defense of Kepler Station. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp green eyes. Her uniform was decorated with medals from dozens of battles across human space. When Kethver's battle group of 60 ships approached the station, she opened communications herself. "General Kethver," she said, looking directly at him through the screen. "I know who you are. You're the one who burned New Geneva and killed 2 million farmers. You're here for our research data." "Admiral Clark," Kethver replied, "I offer you the same terms I have offered every human commander. Surrender now, and your people will be treated according to the laws of war." Susan Clark laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "General, after 2 years of fighting us, you still don't understand. We're not just going to hand over our most important facility to you. We're going to make you pay for every inch of it." The space battle began immediately. 12 human ships against 60 Zephyrian vessels should have ended in minutes. But the humans had done something that Kethver had never seen before. They had turned the entire research station into a weapon. Dr. Alex Turner was the station's chief scientist. He had been working on experimental fusion reactors that could power entire cities. But when the Zephyrian fleet arrived, he began systematically overloading the reactors, not to destroy the station, but to create controlled fusion pulses. Each pulse sent out waves of energy that disrupted Zephyrian shield systems and blinded their sensors. The human ships used these moments of confusion to strike at enemy vessels with precise attacks. Lieutenant Chris Morgan led fighter squadrons that darted between the energy pulses like fish swimming through coral reefs, the station's main structure was a giant ring rotating around a central hub. Engineer Rachel Green had modified the rotation system to work like a massive centrifuge. As Zephyrian boarding parties tried to dock with the station, sections of it would suddenly spin at incredible speeds, crushing the enemy ships against the hull or flinging them into space. Captain Tony Miller commanded the human cruiser Liberty, which was already damaged from previous battles. Its hull was patched with metal plates and its engines were held together with emergency repairs. But Miller had discovered something important about Zephyrian battle tactics. They always tried to capture valuable targets instead of destroying them. Miller used this knowledge against them. He positioned his ship directly between the station and the largest Zephyrian battleship, then began deliberately taking damage. The Zephyrians held back their most powerful weapons, trying to disable the Liberty without destroying it completely. What they didn't know was that Miller and his crew were preparing the ultimate sacrifice. Chief Engineer Bob Sanders had been working on the ship's fusion reactor, not to repair it, but to turn it into something that had never been tried before. They were going to create an artificial black hole. The process required someone to manually control the reactor collapse from inside the engine room. Bob Sanders volunteered, knowing he would die in the process. As Zephyrian forces closed in on the Liberty, he began the final sequence. Meanwhile, inside Kepler Station, the human defenders were using their research equipment in ways it was never designed for. Dr. Janet Adams had been studying gravity fields before the war. Now she was using her equipment to create localized gravity wells that trapped Zephyrian soldiers in corridors and crushed them against the walls. Professor Mike Rogers had been working on communication systems that could send messages across the galaxy instantly. He turned these systems into weapons that sent focused energy beams directly into Zephyrian ship computers, scrambling their navigation and weapon systems. The station's medical bay became a fortress, defended by Dr. Helen Park and her staff. They had turned surgical lasers into weapons and medical scanners into sensor jammers. Even the patients who were recovering from wounds picked up weapons and joined the fight. But the most disturbing thing for Kethfer was how the humans had modified the station's life support systems. Rachel Green and her engineering team had created atmospheric conditions that gave humans advantages over Zephyrian boarders. They reduced oxygen levels in some sections to slow down enemy soldiers, increased pressure in others to cause disorientation, and filled certain corridors with gases that were harmless to humans but toxic to Zephyrians. The station had become a maze designed to confuse and kill invaders. Emergency blast doors opened and closed in patterns that guided enemy forces towards sections where the artificial gravity had been weaponized. Corridors that looked like escape routes actually led to rooms filled with experimental energy fields that cooked anything that entered them. Lieutenant David Chun led human Marine squads through maintenance tunnels that connected different parts of the station. Instead of fighting conventional battles, they used hit-and-run tactics, appearing from ventilation shafts and disappearing into service corridors. They knew every inch of the station and used that knowledge to ambush enemy forces in places where the Zephyrians couldn't use their superior numbers. The turning point came when Captain Tony Miller's plan reached completion. The Liberty's reactor had been pushed far beyond its safety limits. Bob Sanders, still alive but dying from radiation poisoning, sent the final signal to Miller on the bridge. "Captain," Sanders said through the communication system, his voice weak but determined, "the reactor is ready. Once I trigger the collapse, you'll have maybe 30 seconds before the black hole forms. Get everyone to the escape pods?" "Negative, Chief," Miller replied. "We're staying with the ship. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." The Liberty's crew had voted to remain on board. They knew that someone needed to guide the shipped during the final approach to make sure the artificial black hole formed in exactly the right position to take out the maximum number of enemy vessels. Miller activated the ship's communication system and broadcast on all frequencies. This is Captain Tony Miller of the United Human Space Navy ship Liberty. We are the sons and daughters of Earth. We do not yield, we do not break, and we do not go quietly into the night. The Liberty charged directly at the center of the Zephyrian fleet. Bob Sanders triggered the reactor collapse just as the ship reached the heart of the enemy formation. The artificial black hole that formed consumed the Liberty instantly, but it also pulled in 3 Zephyrian capital ships and damaged 6 others. The explosion of light and energy that followed lit up the entire star system. When it faded, a quarter of Kethver's fleet was gone, but the battle wasn't over. The remaining human ships continued fighting with the same desperate creativity they had shown throughout the war. Commander Paul Davis used his damaged destroyer to ram a Zephyrian cruiser. Captain Lisa Brown turned her science vessel into a missile, loading it with all the station's most dangerous experimental materials and guiding it into the enemy flagship. Dr. Alex Turner, still alive in the station's central laboratory, made one final contribution to the battle. He overloaded every fusion reactor simultaneously, creating an energy pulse so powerful that it fried the electronics on every ship within 50 kilometers. The pulse destroyed the remaining human vessels, but it also crippled most of the Zephyrian fleet. When the battle finally ended, Kepler Station was a burning wreck floating in space. Every human defender was dead, but Kethver's fleet was shattered. He had started the battle with 60 ships and 50,000 soldiers. He ended it with 23 damaged vessels and fewer than 15,000 survivors, standing on his bridge, looking at the debris field that had once been humanity's greatest research facility. Kethver finally understood what he was fighting. The humans weren't just willing to die for their beliefs. They were willing to turn their deaths into weapons that could destroy armies. That night, General Kethver sent a message to Zephyrian High Command. It contained only one line: request immediate reassignment. I can no longer serve in this war. 3 days later, he submitted his formal resignation from the Zephyrian military. 6 months after General Kethver resigned from the Zephyrian military, he found himself standing in a place he never expected to be. He was on Earth, looking at a small farm in the mountains of Colorado. The war had ended 3 months ago with a ceasefire agreement. Both sides were too exhausted to continue fighting. Kethver had requested assignment to the new cultural exchange program between humans and Zephyrians. His former commanders thought he had lost his mind. Why would a decorated general want to live among the enemy that had broken his fleet and ended his career? But Kethver needed to understand something that had been eating at him since the Battle of Kepler Station. He needed to understand why humans fought the way they did. The Zephyrian embassy had placed him with a host family named the Williams. John Williams was a man in his 50s with gray hair and calloused hands. His wife Patricia was a nurse at the local hospital. They had 3 children, but their oldest son Steve had died during the battle for Kepler Station. He had been a Marine lieutenant aboard one of the ships that defended the research facility. When Kethver first arrived at their farm, he expected hatred or at least fear. Instead, John Williams shook his hand and helped him carry his bags into the house. Welcome to our home, John said simply. Patricia's cooking dinner? Hope you like beef stew? Kethver stared at the human man. Your son died fighting against my forces, he said, confused by the warm welcome. How can you invite me? Into your home? John Williams was quiet for a moment, looking out at the fields where corn grew in neat rows. Steve knew what he was fighting for, he said finally. He died protecting something he believed in. Hating you won't bring him back, and it won't make his sacrifice mean anything. This was Kethver's first lesson about humans. They could separate the war from the warrior. Patricia Williams was a small woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. She worked long hours at the hospital, treating patients who had been injured in the war. Some of them were former Zephyrian soldiers who had been captured and were now receiving medical care alongside human veterans. How can you heal the same people you were fighting against? Kethver asked her one evening as she prepared for another shift. Because they're hurt, Patricia said, as if this explained everything. When someone is bleeding, it doesn't matter what uniform they used to wear. My job is to fix what's broken. The Williams had 2 younger children still living at home. Kevin was 18 and studying engineering at the local college. Amanda was 16 and played violin in the school orchestra. Both of them treated Kethver with curious friendliness rather than suspicion. Kevin was building a rocket for his senior project. Kethver watched him work in the garage, using principles of propulsion that were similar to Zephyrian technology, but applied in completely different ways. Are you making a weapon? Kethver asked, remembering how humans had turned everything into instruments of war. Kevin laughed. No, sir. It's for studying weather patterns. Farmers around here need better data about rainfall and wind currents. This rocket will carry sensors up into the atmosphere and send back information that will help them grow better crops. Kethver was amazed. The same technology that humans had used to build missiles during the war was now being used to help plants grow. Amanda played violin in the school orchestra, and her music teacher was someone Kethver recognized. Captain Lisa Carter had been the weapons officer on the Defiance during the very first battle of the war. The same woman who had continued firing weapons while her console exploded around her was now teaching children how to make beautiful music. How do you go from being a warrior to being a teacher? Kethver asked her after one of Amanda's concerts. Lisa Carter smiled, but it was different from the predator smile she had worn during battle. This smile was warm and peaceful. The war is over, she said. Now we build instead of destroy. Music helps kids learn discipline and teamwork. Those are good skills for any future they choose. Living with the Williams family, Kethver began to see patterns in human behavior that he had missed during the war. Humans didn't fight because they loved violence. They fought because they loved something else more than they feared death. John Williams showed him this during their daily work on the farm. The man woke up before sunrise every day to tend to animals and crops. He worked until sunset, his hands growing rough from handling tools and equipment. When Kethver asked why he worked so hard, John pointed to his family eating dinner around the kitchen table. Everything I do is for them, John said. During the war, every human who fought was protecting something like this, a family, a home, a way of life. That's why we never surrendered. We weren't fighting for conquest or glory. We were fighting for love. Patricia Williams proved this point in her own way. She worked double shifts at the hospital, treating both human and Zephyrian patients with equal care. When Kethver asked her why she helped former enemies, she looked at him with surprise. They're not enemies anymore, she said. They're just people who are far from home and need healing. During the war, I lost friends and patients to Zephyrian weapons. But holding on to anger won't help anyone get better. The local community slowly accepted Kethver's presence. The farmers who had lost sons and daughters in the war still nodded politely when they saw him in town. The shopkeepers sold him groceries without hostility. Children stared at his purple skin and forearms with curiosity rather than fear, but the most surprising friendship came from an unexpected source. Commander Pete Jackson, who had coordinated the space defense of New Geneva, now ran a civilian shipping company. His roots brought him through the area every few weeks, and he started stopping by the Williams farm to visit with Kethver. You know, Pete said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, during the war, I hated everything about your people, your ships, your weapons, your tactics. But I never hated you personally. Does that make sense? Kethver thought about this. You fought against the uniform, not the person wearing it. Exactly, Pete nodded. War makes people do terrible things, but it doesn't make them terrible people. When the war ended, we had a choice. Keep hating or start healing. Hate just makes more war. Dr. Alex Turner, the scientist who had created the fusion pulse weapons at Kepler Station, also became a regular visitor. He was working with a team of Zephyrian scientists on joint research projects. Instead of building weapons, They were developing new medical technologies and improved space engines for exploration. The same knowledge that helped us fight can help us explore, Alex explained during one of his visits. We're planning a joint mission to study the galactic core, humans and Zephyrians working together to discover new worlds. Kevin Williams was excited about this project. He had applied to join the expedition as a junior engineer. His rocket experiments had caught the attention of the selection committee, and they wanted someone who understood both human adaptability and Zephyrian precision. Imagine what we could discover out there, Kevin said, his eyes bright with excitement. New planets, new forms of life, maybe even new civilizations. And we'll approach them as explorers, not conquerors. As the seasons changed and Kethver spent more time with the Williams family, he began to understand something profound about humans. Their greatest strength wasn't their refusal to surrender or their creativity in battle. Their greatest strength was their ability to turn enemies into friends. The same species that had fought with such desperate ferocity during the war was now working to heal the wounds that the fighting had created. They helped former enemies welcome strangers into their homes and taught their children to build rather than destroy. One evening, as Kethver helped John Williams repair a fence damaged by winter storms, the human asked him a simple question: "Are you happy here?" Kethver stopped working and looked around at the farm, the mountains in the distance, and the warm lights of the house where Patricia was helping Amanda practice violin. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten: peace. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think I am." "Good," John said, hammering another nail into the fence post. "This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." Standing in the gathering darkness, listening to the sound of violin music drifting from the house, Kethver realized that he had found something more valuable than military victory. He had found a place where a former enemy could become family. The war that had begun with misunderstanding was ending with acceptance. And for the first time since he had watched Captain Jake Morrison die in the first battle, Kethver felt hope for the future. 2 years had passed since Kethver first arrived at the Williams farm. The alien general who had once commanded fleets and conquered worlds now spent his days helping John Williams fix tractors and teaching Amanda Williams about Zephyrian mathematics. His small apartment overlooking the farm had become more than just a place to live. It had become home, but Kethver was also building something larger than just a peaceful life. His apartment had become a meeting place for an unusual group of people. Former soldiers from both sides of the war would gather there on weekends, sharing stories and trying to make sense of the conflict they had all survived. Commander Pete Jackson still visited whenever his shipping routes brought him through Colorado. Dr. Alex Turner came by monthly to discuss the joint research projects that were growing between human and Zephyrian scientists. Even some of Kethver's former Zephyrian officers had joined the cultural exchange program and would stop by. When they were in the area, the conversations in Kethver's apartment were unlike anything that had happened before in galactic history. Former enemies sat around the same table, drinking coffee and talking about their experiences during the war. They shared their fears, their losses, and slowly, their hopes for the future. "You know what I learned during the war?" said Captain Frank Miller, a human pilot who had lost his ship during the Battle of New Geneva. "I learned that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified." Commander Zethker, a Zephyrian officer who had served under Kethver, nodded thoughtfully. "Among my people, we believed courage meant following orders without question. But watching humans fight taught me that real courage sometimes means questioning everything." These discussions were having an impact beyond just the people in the room. The ideas they shared were spreading through both human and Zephyrian communities. Veterans were writing books about their experiences. Scientists were developing new technologies based on lessons learned during the war. Politicians were creating new policies for how different species could live together peacefully. The breakthrough that would change everything came from an unexpected source. Kevin Williams, now in his second year of college, approached Kethver with an idea that seemed impossible. "Mr. Kethver," Kevin said one evening as they worked in the garage on his latest rocket project, I've been thinking about what you told me about Zephyrian manufacturing techniques. What if we combine them with human engineering approaches? Kevin had been studying the reports from the joint research projects. Zephyrian technology was incredibly precise and efficient. Human technology was adaptable and creative. But no one had really tried to merge the two approaches completely. What did you have in mind? Kethver asked, setting down the wrench he had been using to help adjust the rocket's guidance system. Kevin pulled out a folder full of sketches and calculations. Medical equipment? He said excitedly. Zephyrian precision manufacturing could build surgical tools that are 100 times more accurate than anything we have now. But human adaptive programming could make them respond to unexpected situations. During operations, the idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Zephyrian machines were perfect for tasks they were designed to do, but they couldn't handle changes or surprises. Human machines were flexible and creative, but they lacked the precision for delicate work. Together, they could create something better than either species could build alone. Kethver contacted Dr. Alex Turner, who immediately saw the potential. Within weeks, they had assembled a team of human and Zephyrian engineers to develop the first prototype. The project became a symbol of what cooperation between the two species could accomplish, but Kevin's idea sparked something even more important. If humans and Zephyrians could work together to heal people, what else could they accomplish by combining their strengths? The answer came from an unexpected direction. The joint deep space exploration project that Dr. Turner had mentioned was finally ready to launch. Admiral Susan Clark, who had defended Kepler Station with such determination, was chosen to command the mission. Her crew would include both humans and Zephyrians, working together to explore the unknown regions of the galaxy. The ship they built for the mission was a marvel of combined technology. The hull used Zephyrian materials that were stronger than anything humans had ever created. The engines used human adaptive systems that could adjust to any type of fuel or energy source they might encounter. The weapon systems had been replaced with scientific instruments designed to study new worlds rather than conquer them. Most importantly, the mission's approach to first contact with unknown species was based on everything that both humans and Zephyrians had learned about each other. They would lead with curiosity instead of conquest. With protection instead of domination, Kethver was chosen to serve as the mission's diplomatic advisor. His experience in both making war and making peace made him uniquely qualified to help the expedition deal with whatever they might encounter in the depths of space. 3 months before the launch, Kethver stood in his garden behind the apartment, watching Earth's sunset paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of purple and gold. John Williams joined him, as he did most evenings after finishing the day's work on the farm. "Nervous about going back to space?" John asked, settling into the chair that had become his usual spot during their evening conversations. "A little," Kethver admitted, but also excited. "This mission represents everything I've learned about humans. You don't just fight to destroy your enemies, you fight to protect what you love. And sometimes the best way to protect something is to explore and understand the universe around it." John nodded, looking out at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Steve would have loved this mission. He always talked about exploring the galaxy, finding new worlds and new life. He never wanted to conquer anything. He just wanted to see what was out there. "He would have made a good explorer," Kethver agreed. "All humans would. You have something that my people lost a long time ago. You still believe that the unknown holds wonders instead of just threats." The launch of the exploration mission became a celebration across both human and Zephyrian space. For the first time in centuries, a military fleet was being replaced by a scientific expedition. Instead of weapons designed to destroy, they carried instruments designed to discover. Admiral Clark's final message before departure was broadcast to both species. "We go into the unknown, not as conquerors, but as students. We carry with us the lessons of war, but more importantly, we carry the hope of peace. If we encounter new life, we will greet it with open hands instead of closed fists." The mission's first major discovery came 6 months after launch. They found a solar system with 3 inhabited planets, home to a species that had been fighting a civil war for over a century. The expedition's response was shaped by everything Kethver had learned about human nature. Instead of taking sides or imposing solutions, they offered to mediate. They shared their own story of how two warring species had learned to become friends. They provided medical aid to both sides and helped establish communication channels that had been destroyed by years of fighting. The Civil War didn't end immediately, but for the first time in decades, the fighting stopped long enough for peace. Talks to begin. The expedition moved on, but they left behind a joint human-Zephyrian embassy to help the peace process continue. News of this success traveled back to Earth and the Zephyrian homeworld. It proved that the lessons learned from the human Zephyrian war could be applied to other conflicts across the galaxy. Instead of spreading through conquest, peace could spread through example. Standing in the expedition's observation deck, looking out at stars that no one from either species had ever seen before, Kethver reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had begun as a general trying to understand an impossible enemy. He had become a diplomat working to prevent future wars. In his final report to both the Zephyrian High Command and the Human Space Council, Kethver wrote, "I have learned that humans are not invincible because they are the greatest warriors in the galaxy. They are invincible because they refuse to let war define them. They fight when they must, but they always remember that the goal of fighting is to protect something worth building. The war between our species taught us that any conflict can be won through superior force. But the peace we have built together has taught us something more important. Any conflict can be ended through superior understanding. We have turned our former battlefield into a launching pad for exploration. We have turned our former enemies into our closest friends. And we have proven that the greatest victory is not defeating your opponent, but convincing them to join you in building something better." The expedition continued its journey into the unknown, carrying with it the most powerful weapon that either species had ever developed. Not superior technology or tactical genius, but the simple truth that former enemies could become family, and that the best way to win a war was to make sure it never happened again. Behind them, on a small farm in Colorado, John and Patricia Williams continued their daily work, tending crops and healing people, proving every day that the most important battles were not fought in space,